Welcome to the Dawn to Dusk podcast with your host, Douglas Wood, author of From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. In each episode, Doug speaks with distinguished legal professionals who have mastered the intricacies of building a successful law practice and then transitioning to retirement or other fulfilling pursuits when the right time comes. Now, let's join Doug for today's insightful discussion.
Today on Dawn to Dusk, we welcome a guest whose career has hit the highest levels of global law firm leadership to now a deeply impactful role in public service, Alexander Sandy Thomas. Sandy is currently the Chief Legal Officer of Kids in Need of Defense, or KIND, a leading nonprofit focused on protecting unaccompanied and separated children as they navigate immigration and asylum systems. KIND provides vital legal defense to some of the world's most vulnerable individuals, children alone and on the move. It's a mission Sandy embraced after years of supporting the organization through pro bono service while he was at Reed Smith. In addition to his role in KIND, Sandy recently co-founded Virginia's Children's Partnership, a nonprofit launched alongside several Virginia business leaders. Its mission is to design and advocate for the higher functioning child welfare system in Virginia, a testament to Sandy's ongoing commitment to systems level change in the lives of children. Before entering the nonprofit world, Sandy sat on the top for a decade and more as the global meetings that you had all the time, Sandy.
We did.
the global managing partner and chair of Reed Smith LLP, one of the world's largest and most premier international law firms. Under his leadership, and I was privileged to be a partner in the firm during that tenure, the firm expanded from 31 offices across 10 countries, saw revenue growth from 1.1 billion to over 1.4 billion, and a substantial increase in profits per partner. Thank you very much, Sandy.
You're welcome.
His tenure was marked by a culture, as it always was there, of collaboration, client service, and expanded pro bono assignments and engagement. Sandy earned his undergraduate degree from Trinity College and his JD from Washington & Lee. His legal roots are in litigation and antitrust, including service at the U.S. Department of Justice and a special assistant U.S. attorney. He was a former clerk to Judge Robert Marriage, Jr., and he has carried a deep commitment to justice throughout his career. Welcome to the podcast, Sandy.
Doug, I'm really happy to be here. It's great to see you.
So, we talked a little bit before and sort of what we're going to talk about, but most importantly, at first, I'd like to, who is Sandy Thomas? I know you come from a lawyer's family, your father, your grandfather. How did you take that track to becoming a lawyer, and why?
Yeah, as you said, we've sort of got a lot of lawyers in the family, and I think from the very earliest days, I just had this abiding belief. I think largely instilled by my dad, who was my law partner and yours, that the law could be a positive force in people's lives. And his view was, and I distinctly remember this from childhood, was, if there's an issue that we're trying to solve, you can do that through the law. And in his case, it was about changing the law. I mean, he was very involved in legislative policy in Virginia, and it just instilled in me this view that the law, as I say, can be a positive force for good.
So you started out as you did some services at clerk and in the U.S. Department of Justice as a special assistant U.S. attorney, and then you joined your father's firm, right?
Right.
And take us through that process, and then through the merger into Reed Smith and what happened during then.
Yeah. So I had this wonderful experience. We would need a dozen podcasts to cover a year with Judge Robert R. Marriage, Jr. He was a wonderful man, a large figure. There's a great documentary on him called The Judge, which I recommend to your audience. Judge Marriage really believed in public service. He believed in, he encouraged his clerks to go on into public practice of law. Lots of them went directly into positions at the state and federal level, and that had a big influence on me. And so I was lucky enough to find a spot in the antitrust division in the early '90s at a time when it was a go-go merger environment, and we were overwhelmed with work. It was a fantastic experience, a variety of industries and cases. Again, I could go on, but it was a great experience. I did definitely get to what I felt like it was a crossroads 4 or so years into being at the Justice Department, where there were a couple of things that I felt like were pulling at me, and I think classically the intersection was: do I want to be a career lawyer at the Justice Department? Do I want to go in what I think was a pretty well-worn path from the antitrust division to big law firms with big antitrust practices? Or do I want to go practice law with my dad? And in the end, that was a really easy answer, and it was that third thing. So that's what I did. Not a traditional route to go from the Justice Department, but a great decision. My dad had a law firm of about 85 lawyers. Everybody knew everybody. Yeah, the culture was terrific. My practice was different than my dad's, but I was still going to work with and for him. And it was really fun. It was a really great experience. 2 years after that happened, much to my surprise, his firm combined with Reed Smith in 1999. And that was a very different environment. Highly collegial firm, no doubt, similar to my dad's firm, but suddenly we were a firm with very global ambitions. And as they say, as you would say, Doug, the rest is history.
Yeah. What I find fascinating is that you went from a government position where there was no issue about developing business, or it wasn't really entrepreneurial in that sense. You joined
Right,
your dad for a couple of years there. You came in with an expertise that I assume the firm itself was not all that versed in at the time.
right, right,
And you started to develop your practice, and then all of a sudden you wake up one day with barely 2 years under the belt, and you're with this mega firm in a whole new world with
right.
that kind of an environment. How did you during that process? What were the tricks or the ways in which you developed business? How did you build your book of business?
Yeah. Um, we had, I don't think you would remember him because I think he had retired before you became part of Reed Smith. We had a great partner named Dwayne Beckhorn at Hazel and Thomas. And, Dwayne was a mentor to many. And I distinctly remember Dwayne saying to me with a arm around my shoulder, he was a pretty short guy, so he was reaching up pretty high. And I remember him saying over and over again, the practice of law is a contact sport. You have to be out in the community, out in the greater world, interacting with people, learning from them, listening to them, becoming trusted by the community. And I really enjoyed that part of the business. I won't say it's part of the practice, although obviously those two things are related. And I really enjoyed that from the very outset. There was, as you observed, really none of those things per se were at work in the Justice Department. But the Justice Department was a big organization, and you had to build good relationships within it in order to be in line to do good work, to be assigned to good cases. So whether those skills translated or not, I just dove into the community as deeply as I could, chiefly in Northern Virginia, although downstate as well in Richmond, and tried to win the confidence of people who wanted to hire a lawyer.
So you were more a local development practice
Yeah.
model when you first came on with your dad, and then you entered the larger world of Reed Smith, and your practice arena increased substantially. So how did you reach out to the clients that you developed over those years that were well beyond the Virginia market?
Well, it's really, you wrote the book on this. Okay, there are a couple of dimensions to that. It's the question of identifying client relationships that would have the needs of the bigger firm, whether they knew it or not. and then also growing and tending to relationships within your own partnership, so that what you could do for their clients became evident, as quickly as possible. And you and I are fortunate enough to practice at a firm where that was the prevailing culture. I would characterize it as a culture of curiosity about what do you do, and how is that, how do you do it, and how can that be relevant to client relationships I have? And oh, by the way, here's what I do, and here's how I might be able to help you. So, it's definitely the case that in that first piece, not every client that I, did a lot of work for in the Northern Virginia community had the needs of a big international firm. And the real challenge, there were challenges, of course, to bring clients along into the larger organization, and then realize if it wasn't a good fit, just be honest about that, and then go spend your time looking for clients that did fit.
One of the things that I remember, my firm, when we merged it into Reed Smith in 2004, there were 20 some of us who came on board to Reed Smith, and the height, the largest my old firm was maybe 40 lawyers. So it was about half the size of what your experience was. And I had a decent book of business that I had developed at that point in time. But I found that when I joined Reed Smith and had such a wider base of people, not so much clients, but of people, exactly what you said, where you build the relationships within, and then they find out what you do, you find out what they do, et cetera, et cetera. And, one of the things that I tell folks who are trying to figure out, how do I get out there to develop business? I say to them, no, you don't wait to get out there. First, get in there. First, get to know your partners, get to know everybody that you're going to have as colleagues, and you'll get referrals from there, and then things just kind of, keep at it. It'll work out.
Right.
So you're now at Reed Smith, and I remember our first encounter. I called you down, and I was thinking about this the other day. I called you down in Virginia, and I had a conflict of interest question that I was facing about a client. You had somehow become the resident expert on the ethics and conflicts of interest. I don't know how that happened, but you did. So I called you, and you gave me the advice I needed, and it all worked out fine. But so I got to work with you early on, and I was very, very honored to have worked with your dad on the executive committee, and he and I worked a lot together. And so I sort of felt I watched you from the sidelines, and your dad was great, by the way. He was the one who calmed me down all the time. I was this jerk from New York who wanted to just kick ass when I was on.
He loved you. He loved you. He loved that part about you too.
And he would say, "Calm down, Doug. We're gonna, we'll survive this." In any event, then at some point you made the decision to move from a very active practice, a successful practice in terms of the finances of it, and the book of it, if you want to call it that, and move over into a different role in management within the firm. Take us through that thought process on what sort of pushed you there.
Yeah. First, I'll push back a little bit. I like to think of the positions in law firms, professional services organizations, less as management and more as leadership. So I'll pick on your nomenclature a little bit, unfairly, I guess. Doug, the way these things unfold in the moment, it's not quite as stark as they may look in hindsight. So what I mean by that is, you and I were lucky enough to have as a leader of the firm a really great law partner and leader, Greg Jordan. And Greg was good enough to take an interest in me, as he took an interest in others, in the law firm for sure. And where the firm had a need for leadership, and in my case, my first brush with that was just leading a practice group, which you did for years, really, really well. So, and then, as they say, sort of one thing leads to another in that respect. I tried hard, and I think successfully, to maintain as high a level of client-facing work for as long as possible, while I was also engaged in leadership positions in the firm, for a lot of reasons, not least of which is I really enjoyed the client relationships, and think that's an important skill, to not just rewarding because you get to have great relationships with people that have hard problems to solve, but it's an important skill to keep working on. And so, over a series of sort of increasingly large in terms of size of group and things like that, leadership positions within the firm, kept up those client relationships, which kind of had the effect of growing my own relationships within the firm, because the law business is a service business, right? It's always about the client, always. And so the more client focused I found, you could be in leadership in the professional services model, the more deeply you could build your relationships internally. And I like that too. So I'm giving you a little bit of a long answer, but I can't say, I don't think it's accurate to say I got to a point where I decided that I would no longer, or I would practice much less law and do much more leadership. But over time, that happened, and that's a consequence of, as you say, being more and more involved in leading a firm that is big and all over the place, and 9 different countries. It takes a lot of time.
It reminds me of the old story that the line of soldiers are standing there, and the sergeant major says, "Step forward. Who's going to volunteer for this terrible thing that we're going to have you do?" And you're the only one who didn't step backwards.
You're like, where is everybody?
Like, okay, it's
What
me.
happened?
I mean, I think that we both experienced that at Reed Smith, where we were just there at the moment when we were asked to take a leadership role, and we did. But in your case, your leadership roles got to be very substantial in the firm, to the point of running the entire institution. And that required a phenomenal amount of travel by you, of balancing by you. So you were almost, I'm going to speculate here, that you were eventually got to a position where you could not maintain the highest level of contact with clients that you might have liked, and you had to transition them to other people. Take us through that process.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And I think the same principles were at work then that are at work if we look at you being an excellent example, and others I can think of, and you and I would know of how to transition a practice. And that is to say, um, um, I felt like it was important to be really open with clients. As I sit here, I can recall several conversations with clients that were, in the nature of, look, I'm taking on increasingly significant leadership responsibilities at the law firm. That is having the natural effect of reducing the amount of time I can spend on this. I want to make sure you are in the best hands possible. Let's work on it, and recognize that may not happen overnight. The client is the most. I mean, again, it all comes back to the client. But I felt like, at the time, it was a matter of just being really open with the clients about sort of where my career was going, and really open, and encouraging them to be really open with me about what they felt was going to work and what wasn't going to work, and accepting. And this is probably a hard part, and I think this is also a hard part in the circumstance of, for example, a Doug Wood, working on a succession plan. But a hard part is accepting that this doesn't happen overnight. Winning the confidence of a client, persuading a client that they're being represented at the highest levels by the best work that can be done for them. That doesn't happen overnight. So, openness and time.
Yeah, the observation you make there that I think is so critical is the conversation. And I've come across so many lawyers that are reluctant to have that conversation with the client. They have a fear that the client is going to go to another firm, is going to reject it, or whatever it is. But I also found, as I advise folks, is that you don't characterize it to the client that I'm leaving in that context. You characterize it to the client that your success has helped my success. I'm going to leadership. You've trusted me. Here's new people to trust, et cetera, et cetera. And that process, again, you're right. It takes a long time, a lot longer than you think. But properly done, you leave a legacy. You leave
no doubt
the folks who worked for you, have gotten their just rewards out of the whole process, and
Right.
you feel a lot better about yourself in terms of walking away. I've seen other situations, when I ran Hall Dickler and in other
Yeah.
situations as well, as you're aware of, where there was no transition, and all of a sudden, things fall apart. The client gets new management,
Right.
client's gone, and this
Right.
person's, just like, doesn't know what to do, which is,
Right.
really that's a sad situation. But
Yeah.
so you are, now
But just
you're,
a quick point on that, Doug. I
yeah,
would say there's also I think there's characteristics in that sort of general transition and succession topic. I think there are characteristics of the you, which is to say, the person who is passing on a book of business, or I suppose in my case, sort of transitioning into leadership work. There are characteristics that don't necessarily come naturally to high performing, high achieving people, and I would put chief among them the characteristic of humility, because in effect, what you're saying is, um, I, we all agree that you've been really, really well served. Subtext by me.
right, exactly.
And what I'm going to persuade you of now is that you will continue to be really well served, but not by me, but by others. And that, I don't think that's an easy thing for a lot of people who have achieved at the highest levels like you, to accept. I'm not saying it wasn't easy for you to accept at all. I'm just saying,
No, no,
like you, people who played at the highest levels. And you
you,
also have to have a lot of confidence. So it's humility on the one hand, and then it's confidence on the other hand,
mhm, mhm.
that you can really deliver on this transition plan, and the client's going to be great.
Two real quick thoughts. So the first observation I have when I mentioned to folks on the humility side of it was that, whether we like it or not, sooner or later we all reach our use by date. And
Right.
if you just
Right.
wait too long, it's not going to be a pretty
Yeah.
picture. The
Yeah.
other on humility is, the great lawyers, great leaders, I think, recognize that they didn't get there on their own. They did it with a great
Right.
team, and that, you've got to trust that team. You got to build that team. Can't hide that team. So part of the process, I think, is, and you talk about the years of transition. A few clients I had conversations with where I go, well, yeah, we figured you were going to sooner or later leave, so we're very
Right.
happy with so and so and so and so. So it was like a lot easier than I thought it would
Yeah.
be, because
The clients
because
turns out
maybe I had
clients are
done
really
something right
smart.
earlier on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. So I remember when I was in my office and I got the word that you were moving on. And you were at the top of the heap at Reed Smith. You had been doing a phenomenal leadership job. We had expanded all over the place. Our profits were up, our revenue was up. I mean, and you had held on really well with the collegial atmosphere that the firm, was challenged with as it got larger and larger. And then one day we hear that you're going to move on and become the current position you have at Kind. I'm curious about, where in the process did you make that decision? What prompted you to make that decision? And and then how you dealt with relationships when you did that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for all the compliments in there. There's like anything, I think, in terms of making what feels like a big decision in the moment. There are a variety of different forces at work. For me, Doug, I mean, I'm my orientation. Um, my orientation is around public service and public interest, and it always has been. And so I always had it in my mind that there would be an occasion when I'd want to return to that, and devote myself to that. There's a faith-based component to my thinking, and there was at the time and still is, in terms of what would I really, I want to keep doing important work, and the work that we did at the firm is very important work for really important clients, no doubt. But there's always been in my mind the idea that yes, that's important work, but there is other very important work to be done out there if you're possessed of good cognitive abilities and a law license. Those things, to me were not just latent, but always present, in my perspective on sort of what I want to do in man's search for meaning. So, I felt like um, at the time, and still feel this way, that I could reconcile those different interests that I had personally and professionally. Um, I don't, I don't, I don't know that I had, I don't know that I have, dozens and dozens of years left to practice law and to have an impact. And so I'd like to have a good slug of time in which I can do that in different ways than I think I was having impact at the law firm. And I felt like that the law firm was in a good place and doing well. Now, there's always the daily emergencies that may not be emergencies, but I definitely felt like the law firm was in a good place, and that I had done some hard work, maybe not overt work, and we can talk about that, but hard work on succession planning. And that the firm could succeed at greater levels were I to go and pursue these different, these different interests in terms of doing important work, but important in different ways.
Well,
So,
on that point, Sandy, I'd like to
yeah,
take a little deeper because you invited me to do that. So you knew you didn't. It's like it wasn't like on Monday you decided to move over to Kind on Tuesday. I mean, there was a
no,
process by which you decided you're going to go through this, and because of your, your commitment to the firm and your leadership in the firm, you transitioned it to Casey, ultimately to Casey
right.
Ryan. I mean, can you take us through the process of your thinking, your planning, and how that unfolded?
Sure. There was some sort of tactical stuff, and then some less tactical and more strategic uh, parts of that answer. And from a tactical perspective, um, we at the board level, at the executive committee level, um, we had a rigorous succession planning, um, and this was while I was probably in the last 5 years or 4 years of my leadership at the firm, where we didn't pay lip service to it. We were quite clear about these jobs, if you will, in leadership at the law firm were not forever and shouldn't be designed to be forever. And I think once you kind of open, if you sort of if you're open about that, then a lot of good things happen to it. You have to be aware that when you're open about that, you do risk you do risk some degradation of your power. Okay, but I I and that's just sort of the way it is. But I purposefully injected the global managing partner role into that discussion, notwithstanding the fact that it's a partner choice, and that's the law firm's constitution. It's not everybody. It's not every law firm's constitution, but Reed Smith, it's the partner's choice. But I took the view that when you put people in leadership, um, I and was quite open with my team about this. I wanted people who wanted my job. I wanted people in on the senior management team who wanted the firm to succeed under them too. So a natural extension of that was that I tried with several people in the law firm to put them in positions where they were seen to be leading the firm in ways that suggested that they could lead the firm in the future. It's a $1.4 billion organization. These things are better left not to chance, even though ultimately, as I say, it's a partnership vote. So I worked hard, successfully, I think, over a period of 4 years or so, where I was like, I'm going to just do my best to put people out in front and encourage the ambition to lead the firm, encourage that ambition. And hopefully, without being overt about saying, all right, I'm not going to be doing this forever, and this is the person who I think should be doing it, which I don't think would be fair to the partnership. Um, have the partnership view people as leading the firm and trustworthy to do that.
So when the process unfolded, and Casey took over for the interim, and then eventually
Yeah.
elected without
Mm-hmm.
opposition, obviously. So
Right.
your choices were well done. Your choices well done. And I was going through the process of transitioning my practice at the same time. And one of the thoughts came to me because I know that people talked about succession planning in terms of the law firm's leadership. But many law firms, and to some extent, including Reed Smith, do not have the same kind of discipline towards partner transition. It's just a fact of the matter. I mean, it's not meant to be a criticism. I've come across, as I started to consult with law firms about transition, I've only come across one that actually had a very formal process, and a lot of it I think is because it's again get back to that conversation. We're very comfortable having conversations about transition with clients. We're comfortable having conversations, or clients having advising them on their succession planning. But it's that conversation, particularly if you're a large producer with the law firm, is kind of a little reticent in even having the conversation, which is really a mistake.
May I comment?
Yes, you may. And somehow I think you
totally,
will.
I will. I totally agree with you. I think that that there are other forces at work in addition to your good points, and chief among them is certainly over the course of my experience as a partner in big law, if you will, and I would bet a nickel you would agree with this, or based on your experience, free agency among partners. Let me put it to you this way: if there ever was, a prevailing culture among large law firms around succession planning and the growth and maintenance of mostly institutional, but not necessarily institutional clients centered on succession planning, free agency, which is to say high degrees of partner mobility from one firm to the next, pretty much put that to paid. Because a firm is going to be anxious. The leadership of a firm is going to be anxious about, even no matter how enculturated the idea of succession planning is. A firm is going to be anxious that discussion around succession may result in the departure of a partner, and therefore risks departure of a client relationship. And so these two things are very much at odds. I don't have a solution to it, and I don't know that it's a problem. It doesn't feel virtuous to me in terms of clients and sort of maintaining client relationships, because I think generally it's better for a client to be served by a team that's all pulling in the same direction. But anyway, I'll stop there. But I think that's a
No, your
point's
really well taken. It's a unique business, and the free agency, as it has in sports, has kind of become a real difficult part of the whole process. But anyway, so now you've left Reed Smith, and you're now the chief legal officer for Kind, and you obviously are pursuing something that's very passionate to you, which I think is the best exit ramp is to go on to another passion, in terms of whatever you're going to do with your life and career. So take us a little into the role you have now, and what is your leadership role now, and how are
Sure.
you taking that passion of yours and putting it to operation?
Sure. I think you're right about the passion point as it pertains to me, and then more broadly. In my case, so my passion is around the vulnerable, and what I've realized over time, while I was leading a law firm and otherwise, is I'm really interested in finding the most vulnerable people and trying to help them. And there's a lot that a guy with a law license can do in that area. And so, Reed Smith had and has a long and excellent relationship with Kind. I mean, the firm was one of the, was with Stan Perry and a big team of others at the firm. Reed Smith was one of the largest pro bono providers for Kind, if not the largest. So, in my estimation, I was really proud of that when I was leading the law firm. And B, if you're looking for vulnerable people, it's really hard to find a more accurate profile for that definition than a 11-year-old girl, who's made her way to Guatemala on the back of, a freight train for 5,000 miles, looking for safety, and by herself. So we orient ourselves at Kind around that principle that 11-year-old girl, or most of our clients, they don't really come up any higher than my hip. Okay. um, that, that the setting of, that girl in immigration court by herself, and the next table over is the United States government, well represented, and then a person in a black robe. That's not a good setting. That's not what we should feel good about. And so you asked about my leadership role at Kind. I'm the chief legal officer, chief compliance officer, and I advise. I advise the organization. We're a global organization. I'm used to that. You're used to that. And so I advise the organization on the kinds of things that that nonprofits that do really important work all over the world need to be advised on. I would say I do that plus a lot of other things. I mean, a big feature for what we do at Kind is rely on great law firms like Reed Smith and so many other firms that I could name that you and your listeners would know very well. These are awesome firms. We have relationships, current relationships with all of the AmLaw 50 firms. But I help the organization in their interaction with those firms, often at the leadership level of those firms. But I've been out of law firm leadership now for coming up on 3 years, so I'm sort of an expiring asset when it comes to that. But I know how they operate, and I kind of know how they think.
Yeah.
So I do those things. I get involved in some sort of fundraising type activities based on relationships. And then I advise the board on a regular basis.
So tell us then about your second passion, or whatever you want to call it, on the Virginia Children's Partnership. You sort of expanded. Is it related to what Kind does, or is it another direction? Or give us an explanation.
In a sense, it's related. It really goes back to the beginning of this conversation, which I'll be brief about. I mean, I've always had a little bit of a schizophrenia about the fact that all of my life's orientation. I'm a total jingoist. I'm from Virginia. I think we are the indispensable state. That's kind of how I was raised. And then I spent a large part of my life working at as a partner in and then leading a truly global organization. So there's a little bit of I've got one foot in at home and then one foot in Singapore, and there's a little bit of, as I say, a little schizophrenia about that. But through my work at Kind, we have a team that sort of studies and works on state foster care systems, because a lot of our clients, we have 6,000 clients, as I said, they're young people, and a lot of them end up in foster care all across the country, and a lot of them, because they tend to come into those foster systems at the older end of the spectrum, they are at risk uniquely of aging out of foster care, which is to say they age to a point where they're no longer in the foster care system, but without a permanent family placement. And that's a bad thing. And I got curious because, as I said, I'm a total Virginia jingoist. I got curious about how Virginia does on these various metrics of foster care and child welfare. Answer: not good. And to me, that's not right. We're so great at so many things. Number one state for business. We have great systems of healthcare. We have great higher ed in Virginia. But we could do a lot better when it comes to child welfare. So I spent the last year and a half, along with a couple of friends of mine who I've done political things with in Virginia over the years, studying the system, asking them loads and loads of dumb questions of people who've been very patient with us to try and understand how our system works. And I think we now know a lot more about it than we did when we started. And we have, I think, a pretty good sense for what we need to do better. It's going to take time. We view this as a 10-year project at least. It took 100 years to get to where we are. So anyway, that's called the Virginia Children's Partnership. And it's really, I think it's important work. I think it's interesting work. I'm interested in all things sort of Virginia government and how it functions, but for better or for worse. And so it scratches that itch.
Yeah, there you go. Well, you may not know this, so we have one thing in common. I was born in Virginia.
I
So
did not know
I
that.
have a little bit of Virginia in me.
I knew I
Didn't
loved you,
live there
Doug.
very long, but when my father was passing through some military thing,
Oh,
here comes
great.
Doug. So it
Where
was a
where were
fleeting
you?
moment, but I am a
Where were you
Virginian.
born?
Fort
Where were you
Belvoir,
born?
Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah,
Right
yeah.
down the street from me.
Total army brat. Yeah,
I knew we
from
were
the very
brothers in
moment of
many
birth, I
ways.
was a brat. So anyway, so okay, the two questions, and we'll be done. One is, what advice do you give to, you know, lawyers who are sort of facing a fork in the road, if you will, that they're struggling with a decision to go one way or the other, whether it's retirement, transition, whatever you name it. That's number one. And then number two, I want to conclude with, what's next for Sandy Thomas?
Okay. Well, I think on that first question, uh, I guess what I would say is um, I would not underestimate the impact that you can have um, in a lot of different ways, but the impact you can have, as I say, as a lawyer in a community, and it's strange. I mean, I guess there's a reason why. I mean, and you would know more about this than I would, but there's a reason why that Hollywood and the big studios can't stop making movies and TV shows about lawyers for whatever reason, historical or otherwise. You start out with, in the community with people thinking, okay, here's somebody that we should listen to, and so the idea, and you can get used to that when you're in a practice of law. You have clients that that you really value and you're doing really good work for. But the degree of satisfaction outside of that private practice dynamic of attorney client, the degree of satisfaction you can derive from really digging into solving problems, understanding issues, is very high. It's different than the satisfaction that you get in the private practice. It's different, and I don't mean just you make less money or whatever. I don't really mean that. I mean it's just very different. Um, um, and it's less in the moment reward than it is. And at least in my case, I've just got my shoulder to the wheel on a couple of things, and I can see progress. I can see that I'm hopefully making a difference. But nobody's given. I don't have any spreadsheets coming out across my screen. No guy is taking me through a partner meeting report with quarterly or monthly results. So you just kind of have to adjust your expectations, but don't underestimate the impact that you can have if that's what you're after. If you're after impact, you can have a huge amount of impact outside of that, sort of high intensity professional services world. So that's
Before you get to the last question, I'll just add to that point a variation on the theme is that I think that, in addition to impact, obviously we'd love to have impact. I think that process is one also of challenging relevancy. You're fearful of no longer being relevant. And to your point, there are so many different ways outside the traditional practice you may have had, private practice or whatever, where
yeah,
as a lawyer, you have all sorts of options to become relevant in other
yeah,
ways that can be very
yeah.
rewarding that lawyers tend to be, don't focus on or aren't willing to understand. So that's a
Right.
transition process, I think, that requires an open mind. So what's next for Sandy?
I think that's right. Although I'll give you a quick comment on that. Maybe it's the other side of the coin that I was making the point that I was making. It's pretty easy in the big law firm world, and I think in the big professional services world, to overestimate your relevance. It's pretty easy to do that. I heard a clip from the other day from somebody who was, I honestly can't remember who it was, but said, this is somebody who had retired from Congress, I think, and said, I get lots of people who say, I want to do this, I want to run that. And his comment was, actually think hard about that because if you really want to have impact in somebody's life, you could probably have more impact as a teacher than as a politician. Now, you may not have people like lining up to shake your hand, maybe, but as I say, it's pretty easy to overestimate just how relevant and how important you are in the private practice of law. Lawyers make a lot of money, but money isn't necessarily a proxy for relevance.
That's true. That's so true. And it's the money problem is also part of the issue. We won't get into that about being fearful that how am I, I'm here to make money, not be impactful as a lawyer. And there's sort of, I always thought there were two kinds of lawyers who were in it for the money and that's it. And that's, whatever it is, that's their thing. And lawyers who were in it because they wanted to be lawyers and wanted to lawyer and have an impact in that context. And there you can do it in so many different ways, even while you're at the firm. I mean, when you were leading the firm, you really pushed the pro bono side of the firm to the extent I forget what the statistic was the second largest or largest client of the firm, or
no, cumulatively, pro bono work was our largest client, and it was not close.
Yeah, and that, which is phenomenal in terms of impact. Okay, let's conclude. What's next for Sandy Thomas?
I want to have impact in where I live, in Virginia. That's what I'm doing now. What's next in terms of just how I'm going to spend my time. I'm focused on, like I said, I'm focused on vulnerable people, and how I can help vulnerable people with whatever skills I have. I would like to see my organization. I'd like to see Kind grow and thrive, and deliver, to a point where every kid. And I don't know that this is possible, but every kid who shows up here, and lots of kids do, by themselves, has a lawyer. I think that would be, that if that's next, then that's awesome. And in some handful of years' time, I'd like to see, the 100,000 kids that come into the child welfare system in Virginia encounter a system that works, encounter a system that treats them with dignity, treats their biological parents with dignity, treats those who are willing to take them in with dignity. That's what I'd like to see. So what's next is I want to be part of those. I want to be part of those things succeeding. Well,
having known you for 20 years, Sandy, and seen you rise to the positions you've and had the impact that you've had, I have little doubt that'll be a successful story. But thank you very much for being on the program. I think this was a terrific session, a lot for people to listen to and learn from. So thank you, Sandy, for being part of the process.
Doug, you're very welcome. I'm really happy to see you. Any chance to visit with Doug Wood is time well spent.
I'll take that as a thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Dawn to Dusk podcast. You can learn more on building and transitioning a multi-million-dollar law practice in Doug's book, From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. If you're interested in working with Doug, suggesting future guests, or have questions you'd like Doug to ask guests in upcoming episodes, reach out to him at douglas.wood@wood.law or visit his website at dawntodusk.wood.law. And if you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your peers. Until next time, we appreciate your viewership.